Now let's turn to Sri Lanka. The left-wing opposition candidate Anura Kumara Dissanayake has won Sri Lanka's first presidential poll since the country defaulted on its international debts 2 years ago. And in his first comments, the new president said that it was a victory for all Sri Lankans. He promised a fresh start but vowed to work within the framework of an existing deal with the IMF. Well, the official result was announced after a second round of counting, which included second preference votes. So let's cross over to our South Asia correspondent Samira Hussain, who's been monitoring this in Colombo for us. So we've got a result, Samira. Just talk us through it.
Right, so I'm actually standing outside the Election Commission office, and this is where the official result was announced, that in fact Anura Kumara Dissanayake was was said to have won these elections. You can imagine that actually just a few moments ago there were lots of people that had come to the streets that were cheering and just so excited at this pretty significant political sea change that has happened in Sri Lanka. You know, this is a really remarkable election because there are so many firsts. This is the first time that we've really seen the breaking down of a long-standing political dynasty that has really been part of government for decades here in Sri Lanka. Although he's not new to politics, Anura Kumara Dissanayake is really seen as the candidate of change. But it's also a remarkable election because it wasn't fought on ethnic and religious lines. It was really all about the economy. And it's also remarkable because this was a relatively peaceful election. So often in Sri Lanka's history, you've seen violence during these elections, but that was not the case this time around.
Okay, and Samira, just a quick one with you because we've got to go to Germany in just a moment. Election results coming in there, but this is obviously how is he hoping to get Sri Lanka back on track?
That is going to be the biggest task for him. He has to form his government, which is going to be difficult, and then he's going to have to try and get Sri Lanka back on track. But he remains committed to the austerity measures that the International Monetary Fund had placed on Sri Lanka 2 years ago.
To Sri Lanka now, where Anura Dissanayake has claimed victory in the country's presidential election. It was the first since an economic collapse sparked widespread protests in 2022, prompting the then president to flee the country. Our correspondent, Neville Lazarus, has this update, a warning it does contain flashing images.
These elections were to be declared much earlier, but it went into a second round of counting because no candidate got 50%. It's sort of a three-way fight here, but he's obviously made that cutoff. He got 42% in the first round, after which now he's been declared the winner in the second round with a difference. He's got 5.6 million votes. Now, he is a Marxist leader. He's had a ministerial position in a previous coalition government, but most of his team and most of his party members haven't had any experience of governance, and that's been a cause of concern for many people out here. We just spoke to one of his leaders who might be the next prime minister. She said that at least they don't have the experience of bankrupting the government, a sort of a point of view of the previous Rajapaksa regime that caused economic problems for the country. We saw those images of 2022 protesters who had come out on the road. There were pitched battles between them and security forces over the economic crisis. They wanted the government to resign because of the cost of living and everything that happened, and also corruption allegations against the Rajapaksa government. And then we saw the president fleeing the country. His government was overthrown. Pictures of a number of citizens just storming through his house, jumping into the swimming pool, having a dip in the summer heat there. But on a more serious one is the cost of living crisis this country is experiencing is enormous. Everyone you speak to out here says the costs of everything is very high. The salaries do not cover even 10 days of expenses for families, and that's been a major problem. He might find AKD, as he is known out here, he might find winning the elections an easier challenge than running the government from now on, because the economic problems of the country are just enormous.
Neville Lazarus there for us.
Sri Lanka has elected a new president in a crucial election as the country seeks to recover from its worst economic crisis in its history. The pro-working class Marxist lawmaker Anura Kumara Dissanayake has been declared the winner, cruising past incumbent President Ranil Wickremesinghe, who took over the country 2 years ago after its economy hit bottom. Matthew Mary Carachet reports.
Marxist candidate Anura Kumara Dissanayake has won the Sri Lankan presidency, riding a wave of public fury as the nation hopes to recover from the most serious economic crisis in its history. As people were voting on Saturday, Dissanayake was already predicting an upset.
People are voting enthusiastically. After the victory, I urge everyone to remain peaceful. A sign of democracy is that everyone has the right to advocate for any political party and the right to vote for anyone. We should protect that right. After the victory, there should be no clashes, no violence. Our country needs a new political culture.
It's a remarkable turnaround for his half-century-old leftist National People's Power Party, which had long been on the margins. In the 2019 presidential election, he secured only 3% of the vote. Dissanayake has pledged to ease the country's drastic austerity measures to abate a massive rise in poverty. Poverty now affects a quarter of the population. The current government increased income taxes and cut public spending in exchange for 2.6 billion euros in aid from the International Monetary Fund. Dissanayake has promised to renegotiate the deal.
Sri Lanka has elected a left-wing president for the first time. Anura Kumara Dissanayake has delivered his first public remarks as president-elect. He won in a second round of vote counting after the top two candidates failed to win 50% of the initial tally.
There was a need for the government with a mandate from the people in order to rescue the country from the crisis. We know in the recent past the mandate was distorted. The distortion of the people's mandate affected the parliament and other institutions beyond that. The people's mandate that is needed to take this country forward has now been established. That was the main point of the presidential election, and I think the general election should be held immediately after.
Manel Fernandez has more from Colombo.
Given his campaign, he was very decisive, being very, very confident in the pledges he made, carrying the hopes of a people, of a nation, most of his supporters would say, with him in that very intensive campaign. There was a certain amount of energy as he walked through a room. I remember we filmed the launch of his manifesto and also a couple of election rallies as we covered the candidates. And it was almost palpable that, people stood up, took notice, craned their necks to see this man. And he's a dynamo. He's not a very tall man, but he packs a powerful punch, and that kind of vitality and charisma is something he brings to this role. And many people in Sri Lanka who have chosen to take the gamble with him, as they have lost all confidence in the old names, the same old, saying we've gone there, we've done that, we've seen repeatedly our hopes and our aspirations being dashed. So let's try out this guy. Obviously, Anura Kumara Dissanayake has been in Parliament for 20 years, and he has seen the way politics and the political game is played.
Tunisians have been